everyone. So I will start recording now. So this link will be sent out to all of the attendees. Once we are finished, you can go back and rewatch it. So with that said, I would like to introduce our speaker, Matt Feldenstein, who got his PhD, I can't even remember at this point, Matt, too long ago, from Ole Miss. He did a postdoc at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, South Carolina, and has been with Noldus for, also can't remember, but a long time at this point.
9 years.
Almost 10 years, yeah, 9 years. Yeah. Matt's an expert when it comes to fear conditioning, and in fact, I've been using EthoVision for 13 years, and I still have to ask Matt for help when it comes to doing fear conditioning protocols. So we're all in for a treat today. And so without further ado, ask your questions away. Matt, the floor is yours, and I'll go on mute.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Jason. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Just very quickly, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to ask Jason, you just muted yourself. I just want to make sure, can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Yes, okay, great, thumbs up. Okay, very good, appreciate it. So yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Again, my name is Matt Feldenstein, and what I'm going to be presenting today is how to use our EthoVision XD software with a fear conditioning setup. Just to kind of give everyone a heads up, I think we mentioned this before, this is open to everyone, and pretty much all the features that we're going to be covering today in EthoVision can be applied to other tasks, not just fear conditioning. So again, even if you're not using fear conditioning, you will learn a few things that you can use. But just to give you a heads up, we are going to be covering a lot of material in a short period of time. So again, hopefully with recording, asking questions, if you need anything, please feel free to let us know. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be covering before we actually get started, that is what is today's program. After a brief introduction about what Noldus is, who we are, what we do, and who I am, I know Jason kind of gave you a little heads up there. We're kind of going to move into, I'm going to give a quick overview of fear conditioning for people that are not 100% familiar. I'm also going to be going over the hardware that you can use to conduct fear conditioning experiments, and of course, how to use EthoVision XT to not only control your hardware, but also track your animals so you can be able to get data the most effective way possible. I'm actually, after a brief PowerPoint, move actually into the EthoVision XT software itself. Again, if you're familiar with the software, there's a number of steps to set up acquisition analysis, but we're going to be focusing on the ones that are really important for fear conditioning, primarily the experiment settings, again, mainly using activity settings, and also setting it up so you can control the hardware that you want to control. The arena settings, again, making sure your arenas are set up correctly, especially if you're doing multiple arenas. And then also making sure that your hardware is mapped correctly for your arena or arenas. The trial control settings. This is what's really important to make sure not only tracking your animal for the duration that you'd like to track, but also controlling the hardware when you want to. And finally, the detection settings, which is the heart of the soul of software, making sure that you set it up in such a way that you're able to track freezing behavior, which is the heart of the measurement that you would like to do for fear conditioning studies. Also go into the analyses, primarily the data and analysis profile, focusing on the data profile, how you can use it to pull out segments of time within a trial. So if you have multiple presentations of a stimulus associated with an aversive stimulus like foot shock, and you want to look at the first presentation compared to the second, compared to the third, et cetera, you can use the data profile to pull out data in that way. Also using the analysis profile to set it up in such a way that you can determine freezing behavior, again, based on your specifications. And we'll also look how you can use the integrated visualization to make sure that the settings work for you. Essentially, if you just basically have it in such a way that it looks like your settings, the analysis profile are not correct, you can always go back. I mean, when you view the integrated visualization, you can always go back to analysis profile and change it. And also statistics and charts, be able to look at the data for the segments that you pull out from the data profile and the settings you did in the analysis profile to get the data the way that you wish. I'm also going to go into give a little additional information about our support, mainly our My Noldus portal. Anyone that's a Noldus customer can get access to the My Noldus portal, and that has a lot of useful information, software downloads, information about your licensing, as well as additional documentation. And of course, even though restrictions are starting to ease up a bit, Just want to make sure with showing you how you can use EthoVision XT remotely if you're not actually able to go into the lab and access the license key or the computer that has it installed. So again, kind of give you a few pointers if you want to be able to access it remotely. Okay. So who are we? Who is Noldus Information Technology? So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, the company was founded in 1989 by Lucas Noldus. Lucas has a PhD in animal behavior, and he actually developed our first software program called the Observer when he was doing his research in entomology to code insect behavior. And actually where the main headquarters is based in the Netherlands. Since that time, Noldus has opened up 2 regional headquarters, one near Washington, DC in the 90s and one in Beijing in the 2000s. We also, in addition to the main headquarters in the Netherlands and the 2 regional headquarters in North America and Asia, we actually have about 23 regional offices throughout the world, as well as 10 distributors. Currently, Noldus has about 160 employees, which would be in 9 different countries. I think 10 is maybe more accurate. So while Noldus is what you consider, based on the size of a relatively small company, we actually have quite the global presence. We have around 11,000 customers in 94 different countries. The reason for that is we offer a large portfolio of complete behavioral research solutions for both human and animal research. That is, we offer complete solutions for behavior research for both human and animal research. Not only software, we also offer hardware systems, could be computers, cameras, audio, physiological data collection systems, optogenetics, eye tracking, and of course, fear conditioning. In addition to the software and hardware solutions, we do offer a lot of knowledge and services. And Jason, who again is the host of this webinar today, he's actually in charge of our grant assistance program, which can help you identify and apply for grant funding opportunities. So I've told you about Noldus and what we do, but who am I? I know Jason kind of mentioned this earlier, but is that I'm a native Mississippian. I received my PhD in neuroscience/ecology from the University of Mississippi/Ole Miss in 2004. At that point, I took a postdoc position in Charleston, South Carolina at the Medical University of South Carolina. That's actually where Jason and I met. We were both postdocs in the same lab. After about 3 years of a postdoc and 5 years as a research faculty position, I decided that I wanted to take my behavioral research experience outside of academia. So in 2012, I joined Noldus. Currently, I live in Frederick, Maryland, which is about 30 minutes north of our US headquarters. It's near Washington, DC. In almost 9 years with Noldus, I've actually worn a number of different hats, mainly what I call the 3 S's. I've been in sales, services, and support. So with that experience, and again, talking to a lot of different customers in a lot of different fields, doing a lot of different research areas, I've really learned a lot. So hopefully I can convey some information about fear conditioning that I've learned from people here today. So enough about me, onto the topic of interest, that is, what is fear conditioning? For those who are not 100% familiar, fear conditioning is a classical conditioning procedure that involves the pairing of aversive stimulus, usually electric shock, with either a unique contextual environment or you can pair that aversive stimulus with discrete cues. Most often it's a tone and a visible light or a visible light. There are a number of different iterations and phases that you can do for fear conditioning studies, training, extinction, renewal, etc. But no matter the procedure that you use, the end result that what you're looking for is to see how much freezing the animal does. So this is basically, again, the different phases. We're looking to see how much, again, is the animal freezing. Of course, if you're interested in more information, you can always go to noldus.com/application/fear conditioning for additional information. So now that I've gone over about what fear conditioning is, but what can you use for fear conditioning studies? There are a number of different companies that offer different hardware solutions to do fear conditioning studies. Ugo Basila is the company that we partner with. Again, they provide fear conditioning setups, and we can use it with our EthoVision XT software. Again, not only to track the animal, but also control the hardware the way that you wish. If you're not familiar with their setup, I have a couple of images here. And the image that I want to kind of point out on the left side over here, you see there's a cylindrical kind of hardware that's attached to the ventilation fan. This piece of hardware has 2 functions. It can provide a visible light you can use as a discrete cue that you can pair with the aversive stimulus, but it also has infrared light capabilities. And this is really important, particularly for video tracking. So no matter if you're using the visible light, you could turn it on during contextual studies, you could use it can turn it on randomly here and there during the trial for discrete cue associated studies. But you always, with this infrared light availability and an infrared light sensitive camera, this always ensures you'll see the animal at all times. So again, no matter if you're using the visible light or not, the infrared light source will light to see the animals as needed. The other piece of hardware that I want to point out here in the upper left of this image, you can see a speaker, and the speaker also has two functions. It allows you to present a discrete tone, but it also can provide white noise. And this is really important if you want to use white noise, particularly if you're using a discrete cue like a tone that's paired with the aversive stimulus. Even though these are sound attenuated cubicles, you want to make sure that the animal does not hear any extraneous noise. Could be noise like a tone being presented in a nearby chamber, another fear conditioning chamber, or extraneous noise in the room. So using this white noise can help basically isolate the animal and make sure that them and only them hear the cue being presented, the tone being presented. The image here on the right here, this is showing you, again, a same shot of the fear conditioning chamber, but we've inserted the arena of interest. This white cable here plugs into a shock grid. So this allows you to control the shock. Also, we can mount the camera inside of it. And as I mentioned, the camera that Noldus uses that we provide, that we mount to the inside of here, right above the arena. This is an infrared light sensitive camera. So again, this infrared light source and this camera, you can always see the animal at all times. Now, this is a really nice setup. Again, it's the ones that I've seen. It's my preferred setup. I'm glad that Noldus partners with Ugobacilla to make sure that this is going to work for you. One additional thing that Noldus has created, we made an addition to this, which I think is a really great addition. And if you look at this image here, again, this is the same kind of setup, but if you look here, you see a white box that's mounted to the top of the social isolation chamber, the sound attenuated cubicle. And this addition, again, Noldus makes this and we insert it inside the Ugobacilla fear conditioning cubicle. This has two functions. In addition to a camera, an infrared light sensitive camera that's mounted inside of it, it also has infrared light source throughout it. Now, this is really nice because as I mentioned before in that previous image, you have an infrared light here on the left side. But if you do contextual studies where you put the inserts, it could be like checkerboard, stripes, whatever, on the walls here, that could block that infrared light, which would make it harder to see your animal. But with this particular addition that Noldus has created, it ensures that no matter what, no matter the setup, you will always have even light throughout the arena. So you can always see the animal at all times. So again, this addition that Noldus has created provides a camera, but also an infrared light source. So you can always see the animals at all times. So we have the cubicles, we have the hardware. Again, we have the shock, we have the light, we have the tone, we have the white noise, we have, et cetera, different hardware. But how can you configure this hardware the way that you want? Yes, you can. So here, this image here on the left, this is a 4 fear conditioning setup. So we have 4 sound attenuated cubicles. But if you look in the center of this image, there's a touch screen. All of these cubicles are attached to this touch screen. And this is an image of what the touchscreen looks like. And if you look at the top, there are 4 tabs where you can click for each individual cage, cage 1, cage 2, cage 3, cage 4. And for each one, you can set the intensity, the frequency of the tone, the intensity of the visible light stimulus, the intensity of the shock that's presented, as well as the intensity of the white noise if you decide to use it. You can set the intensity for each cage individually, if you wish, but it also has a capability. You can set it for one cage and then copy those settings to all the other cages. Not only will that save you time, but it will make sure that you're consistent across all cages that they are getting presented the exact same tone, light, shock, and white noise presentation. So using this touchscreen, you can set the hardware the way that you want, but how do you control it? Can EthoVision control your hardware? Yes, it can. So again, here is an image of the touchscreen. So we have the 4 cages that you can set, but there's also this TTL tab here. And TTL, if you're not familiar, stands for transistor to transistor logic, basically 0 ones. And on this TTL tab, you can set each of the 4 pieces of relevant hardware, the visible light, the tone, the white noise, and shock. You can set them up to say, okay, I want the light to be on input 1, tone on input 2, white noise to be on input 3, and shock to be on input 4. And what you're telling the touch screen is, I'll let something else tell it what to do, when to go on and off. So if we set the hardware the way that we want, now we can tell it, okay, let something else tell it when to turn on and off, and that's where EthoVision comes into play. You can connect this touch screen to the EthoVision software, and not only would the EthoVision software be able to track your animal, but it also would be able to control the hardware the way that you want, turn things on and off when you want. Again, it's zeros and ones on off, and we'll show you in EthoVision how you can do that. So how am I going to show you this? Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move out of the PowerPoint. We're going to go into the EthoVision XT software. And I kind of want to show you the setup and how you can do this. Primarily, I want to show you when you're setting up a fear conditioning experiment, two things that are really important. First of all, is to use activity analysis. Activity analysis, if you're not familiar, this is functionality that was added in version 9 or newer. This is a secondary tracking feature that was added specifically for doing fear conditioning in mobility studies. So you can use it for fear conditioning, tail suspension test, the force swim test. We've even had people use it for sleep studies or even looking at seizure activity in animals. And I'll talk about this in a little bit when we go into software, but essentially this is a secondary tracking feature that's not tracking the animal per se. It is actually tracking changes in the arena. And again, this will make more sense when we get to the software. And also using the trial control hardware module that's in the software you can use. And essentially this allows you to control the hardware when you want to turn the light on, the tone on, the shock on, the white noise, etc. And again, that goes back to the touchscreen. You tell it which inputs you want to use, and then EthoVision can talk to those inputs and turn things on and off as you wish. We'll also go into the analysis part of it, primarily focusing on the data profile. Data profiles can be used, as I mentioned, to pull out segments of time. So again, if you have multiple presentations of a discrete stimulus with the aversive stimulus, and you want to compare first presentation compared to second to third, et cetera, you can do that in data profile. And the analysis profile can be used to set the settings in such a way that you are picking up freezing behavior, immobility, the way that you want, so that the data comes out the way that you wish. And using a combination of the data profile with the analysis profile, you can pull out amount of freezing time during a trial within particular segments of time. So just kind of give you a couple of caveats before we get started. I am going to be using EthoVision XT version 16. I believe this came out a week ago today. This is a very, very new version. So you may see things, if you're using an older version, which most likely are, very few people have 16 already. You may see things that look a little bit different. Don't worry about that. It's just because I'm using a different version, but the main steps I'm going to be talking about, you will have available, particularly for analysis, activity analysis. If you have version 9 or newer, you will see that. I also will let you know that, again, the functionality may look a little different, and the modules that you see available, particularly when I'm in experiment settings, will look different. EthoVision is a modular software. So it really depends on the modules you have available, the options that you see in the experiment settings. So again, when I'm in the experiment settings, if you see certain things you don't see in your software, don't worry about it. It has to do with the options that you have available according to your license. Okay. So what I'm going to do, Jason, I'm sorry, remind me, how do I flip screens? What do I have to hit? Let's see.
You can do it with Alt-Tab.
Alt-Tab, thank you. Sorry about that.
Before you do that, Matt, a question came in about the white noise level.
Yes.
Question is, what do you use for white noise, and what is the decibel level?
So on the Ugo Bazille touchscreen, everything's in percentages, like how the light is, the white noise, and also the this tone. It's in the percentage. I cannot remember specifically, but the percentages is detailed in the manual. What 50% equals in decibels or lumens, et cetera. I think it's in the manual, but I'm not entirely sure. The white noise, I think in general, you want it loud enough. This is just my opinion. You want it loud enough that you can hear it outside the chamber, but not so loud. You don't want it deafening loud, because obviously I would deafen the animal. So again, set it in such a way that you can kind of hear it, but not too much. Hopefully that answers that question. And I'm not sure, again, it depends on users and what they want to do. And I'm sure that people detail that in their methods section in publications where they use fear conditioning setups. Okay, so just want to make sure you can see my EthoVision screen.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Yeah, sorry, I can't see. Okay, so again, what I'm going to go through here, primarily in this setup, the first thing we're going to start with are the experiment settings. So again, if this screen looks different compared to your software, don't worry about it. It's just because the functionality and modules are different. For this particular demonstration, I kind of want to focus on a few things of importance. One thing, of course, if you have the multiple arena module, if you're doing 4 fear conditioning chambers, you want to set this to 4. So again, for this particular setup, it's only 1 chamber. So I'm just going to choose arena 1. But again, you can do up to 4 for the fear conditioning setup. As you saw, it allows up to 4 chambers to be connected to a computer at the same time. Another option, this is an additional module, the multiple body point module. If you have this module, you will see this option here. If you do not, you will only see 2 options, center point and color mark tracking. For fear conditioning, and we'll get into this, tracking the animal is not really important. There are no areas of interest, like not like the elevated plus maze or the Morse water maze or zero maze, et cetera, where there are areas of interest. For the fear conditioning, you don't really care about zones. I don't really care about where the animal is. All I care about is freezing behavior. And that's where activity analysis comes from. So if you have these options available, all 3, definitely do center point tracking. There's no point in doing multiple body point because the body points are not of interest. The general rule I tell people, do not use functionality unless you need it. So you basically, for the track features, you want to do center point detection. But what's really important is this activity analysis. Activity analysis this again was added in version 9 or newer. And this is a secondary tracking feature that is not tracking the animal per se, it's tracking pixel changes that occur in the arena. So when the animal freezes, there will be a low number of pixel changes. And we want to use this for these studies, for fear conditioning, tail suspension, for swim, any kind of study where you want to see when the animal becomes immobile. So while center point, if the animal's not moving, the center point won't move. Maybe the animal's head's moving, maybe they're moving their tail. Things that won't be picked up here. This, for example, multiple body point picks up the base of the tail, not the tail itself. Doesn't pick up the ears, doesn't pick up the whiskers, doesn't pick up the sides of the animal. This is where activity analysis will become important. But we want to use this to determine freezing behavior in our animals. The other option, as I mentioned, that's extremely important, is controlling your hardware. Again, this is a module, and we want to be able to control the hardware. I want to be able to control when the tone comes on, when the light comes on, when the shock comes on, et cetera. So with this module and checking this box, if I click on the settings button, there's a number of different devices that you can use. In this particular example, we're using the Noldus USB I/O box. For the fear conditioning setup, the EthoVision software is connected to the I/O box. The I/O box is connected to the touchscreen. The touchscreen is connected to the chambers. So through that connection, EthoVision is able to control all the hardware as you see fit. This mini I/O box is basically, it's a smaller version of the I/O box. It only has a certain number of connections. The DaniaVision is for zebrafish library research. But for this particular setup, this user used a Noldus USB I/O box. And if I click on this, we can see that there are a number of connectors available. And remember the TTL that I mentioned, transistor to transistor logic, zeros and ones. Since one thing that's really nice about these TTLs is each one of them can control 2 pieces of hardware. Well, actually 2 outputs and 2 inputs, but let's just focus on outputs because we're sending signals to the Ugobazilli setup. So since each one can do 2 pieces of hardware, remembering there are 4 pieces total, the light, the tone, the white noise, and shock. For each chamber, I will need 2 TTLs. They will be custom hardware. Again, any kind of third-party hardware we can interface with for the most part. And I want to name it in such a way so I know what's connected where. So remember, input 1 and 2 was light and tone. Input 3 and 4 are white noise and shock. So I have 2 TTLs for each chamber. If I had a second chamber, I would do 3 and 4. If I had a third chamber, 5 and 6, and a fourth chamber, 7 and 8. And I would name these accordingly. Light and tone, chamber 1. White noise and shock, chamber 1. Light and tone, chamber 2, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really good to make sure you name them accordingly because it makes things a lot easier for the setup later on. So again, for this one fear conditioning chamber setup, I use 2 TTLs, custom hardware, and then name them accordingly, light and tone, which are input 1 and 2, white noise and shock, inputs 3 and 4. So now that we have it, we want to use activity analysis and we want to use trial and hardware control. The next thing that's important is to go into the arena settings. So This is an image again. This is taken from a fear conditioning setup, I believe, like a week ago. Jason was kind enough to give me do a little sample stuff experiment and send it to me. This shows you this is the chamber. So again, the camera mounted overhead. It's infrared light sensitive. We have infrared light that provides good even light throughout the cubicle. Sorry, the arena. And you can see he put the inserts in here. So this is like a contextual, I believe this is a contextual and cue study. So put the white stripes in here. Ugo Bazzelli provides solid colors, checkerboard patterns, stripes, etc. And you can use these if you would like to use them for contextual study. So after the setup, Jason took a background image here and we drew our arena. And really the only thing that's important, and this is up to the user, I'm with the preference, I like to include some of the walls when I do my fear conditioning studies. Other users like to do just the floor because when the animal freezes, they're just on the floor. They're not up against the wall freezing. They're going to be down. So you could make it smaller if you wish. It's up to you. Again, I'm of the opinion that I want to make it just a little bit of a floor, of course, and of course some of the walls, so I can always see the animal at all times. When you draw this based on your calibration scale, when you draw this, you can indicate the size you want to make it. So I made this a nice 35 centimeters square. Now, the size of it is really important, especially if you have multiple arenas, because if I have multiple arenas and considering that the activity analysis is a % change of pixels in the arena, I want to make sure my arenas are the same size. Because you imagine if I made one arena just a floor and another arena that includes some of the walls, when the animal is moving a certain level of activity in this arena, they will be causing a lower % pixel change of the arena compared to the other arena if it's just the floor. So again, it's really important to make sure that they're the same size. If you do have multiple arenas, since we only have one here, we don't see it here. Let me just very quickly, I'll switch this to 2 arenas. If you do have multiple arenas, there's an option to draw one arena and then copy this arena to the other one. So I could copy, if I have 4, I could draw it once in arena 1 and then copy it to 2, 3, and 4. That way ensures they're exactly the same size, but of course I can manually draw them and just indicate the size that I would like to use. So it's up to you how you would like to do it. But this is just kind of giving an indication or something of importance. It is good to make sure that your arenas are exactly the same size because again, immobility based on activity analysis has to do with a % change of this thing here, the arena. Zones are really not of interest here. I really don't care. Again, we don't really care where the animal's located. So just to make it simple, all you need is the arena. I don't think you need zones at all. You could add them if you want, but for fear conditioning studies, I don't really think that it's relevant. But what is relevant, in addition to drawing your arena, it is important to make sure that your hardware is mapped on correctly. So once again, if I had a second, a third, a fourth arena, I would have 3 other columns here. And basically, you can, and it depends on what you put in the experiment settings, the name of the devices. That's why I mentioned in the experiment settings, when you do your hardware, you want to make sure you say light and tone chamber 1, light and tone, white noise and shock chamber 1, light and tone chamber 2, etc., so that you can map the correct hardware. So the software knows automatically what to do based on telling it this belongs to this arena. It knows I need to turn on this tone, this white noise, this shock, this light for that animal, depending on where we are in the trial. So it's really useful for the arena hardware mapping to make sure that you map them on correctly. And even after mapping, I can't actually talk to it since a lot of the IO box connected, but you can test the hardware. So if I was connected to the IO box, there would be a test button and I can test each one of these and turn them on and off just to make sure they're working correctly in the correct arena. So just kind of summarize, for the arena settings, it's important to draw your arena, make sure that if you have multiple, that they are the same size. And it's important to make sure that your hardware is mapped on correctly. Trial control settings. Trial control settings, these are the way, again, if you're not familiar, to control the trial from beginning to end. When do you want the trial to start and stop, and what do you want to happen during the trial? This is the main rule up here, and most of you are probably familiar with this main rule. Usually it's like put the animal in, wait for a certain amount of seconds, start the trial, go for a certain amount of time, and then stop. But when you're controlling hardware, there's actually the capability, you have this option here called subrules, and that's what this is here. A subrule is something that happens during the trial. The main rule controls when it starts and when it stops. But this is when you want something to repeat. So this is really useful. For example, I want to present 3 tone and shock pairings. I can make one sub-rule, and then I'll show you how you can have it repeat if you wish during the trial. So to kind of walk you through here with the main rule, after starting the trial, I added an action, which is right here, custom hardware action. And I called it white noise on. And with the hardware that I pick, again, remember each one can do 2 pieces of hardware. We have an output 1 and an output 2 high and low. Output 1 high in this instance is turn something on. Output 1 low would be instance to turn basically white noise. So white noise on, white noise off, shock on, shock off. So if I want to turn the white noise on, I will choose output 1 high as action. So as soon as I start the trial, it would turn the white noise on, and it will start tracking the animal. We have a time condition here to say wait 2 minutes. So this is kind of a nice, we'll call this acclimation. Again, I added a time condition here. We call this acclimation, said wait 2 minutes. So basically we can kind of get a baseline level of activity for what is the animal doing before we start doing any kind of discrete cue and aversive stimulus presentations. After this 2 minutes, we actually will talk about a sub-rule reference, but basically this thing tells the sub-rule to begin. And let's go through the sub-rule here. This sub-rule, which I've called 3 tone and shock pairings, it's good to give it a name. In here, I have an action. This one's called tone on. And again, light and tone, output 2 high. So that would be turn the tone on. And again, you can test within here. I want to turn the tone on. And then after 28 seconds, I want to turn the shock on, which again would be the white noise shock output 2 high. Then after 2 seconds, I want both of those pieces of hardware to turn off. So it'll be output 2 low, that will turn the tone off. And this one here will be output 2 low, turn the shock off. And then we inserted a random time condition somewhere between 5 and 30 seconds. I want it to repeat. So again, they have a timeout, but it could be random somewhere between 5 and 30 seconds. So this, again, following this, tone on, wait 28 seconds, turn the shock on after 2 seconds, turn both of them off, wait a certain amount of time, and then repeat. So we're using this sub-rule. The tone will be on for 30 total seconds. The tone will overlap with the last 2 seconds, and then they will both turn off, and then it will repeat. When you have a sub-rule, you need to add a sub-rule reference to the main rule to tell it when do you want it to start, how many times you want it to repeat. In this example, you can have multiple sub-rules. I referenced the only sub-rule we have available right now. And I can tell it I want this to execute 3 times. So what will happen after starting the trial, the white noise will turn on. It will start tracking. The animal will hang out for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, this reference will tell the sub-rule to start. It will go through 1, 2, 3 times. Once it's finished, there will be another 2 minutes where nothing happens. This is called post-conditioning. And then it will stop tracking and the trial will be over. So for this trial, there are actually 5 events of interest. The acclimation period, tone shock presentation 1 versus 2 versus 3. And then for the 5th segment, it would be the post-conditioning. So I can compare this presentation to this presentation to the 2nd to the 3rd. And then finally, this post-conditioning time. And we want to look at, that's where the data profiles come of interest. I do want to let you know, for multiple arenas, the trial control settings apply to each arena completely independent from the other. So one animal could have an 8-second timeout, another animal could have a 15-second, another one could have a 28, another one could have a 6. It doesn't matter. It will randomly assign a time and it will repeat. So all your animals will be in different chambers, will have completely random times that the tone and shock are presented. And of course, you can duplicate and also create new trial control settings. So if you want to do an extinction procedure, I could duplicate this and I could delete the shock presentation so the animal's only getting the tone. And again, that will be an extinction procedure. And of course, if we want to do just a contextual with nothing happening, we can just have it where the animal goes in and sits for a certain amount of time, no controlling, no hardware, and that's it. Moving on to the detection settings, the heart and soul of the software. Just going to play the video really quickly here. So here's our mouse inside the chamber moving around. And this is, again, what you're kind of used to for most types of setups. Again, you will see a yellow blob on the animal's body. And if you're, a red dot in the center of the animal when they're, of that yellow blob. When the animal moves, the blob will move, the center point will move. And this is good, for a lot of studies when you want to know where the animal is located. And you usually spend a lot of time, hopefully not, depending on the setup. Using the automated setup, this can basically detect the animal and do most of the settings for you, but you may need to tweak them a little bit just to kind of get it to track the animal correctly. For fear conditioning, this particular tracking, the center point tracking, is not really important. So I tell people, don't worry so much about getting this to work correctly. You saw when the animal rears up, it's a black animal against a black background, part of the animal is lost. Who cares? For fear conditioning, that's not really important. What is important is activity. Again, this particular secondary tracking feature is available only when you add activity analysis as an option in the experiment settings. And what this has to do here, you can set the sensitivity of this for basically to determine when a pixel changes. Again, it is a pixel change within the arena. So if I just really quickly, if I add the arena here, okay, we see basically it's a % change of pixels of this orange blob. The way that this works is the activity threshold. Let me go back to the detection settings here. This is a sliding scale, it's grayscaling. Just say, for right now, because the animal is darker, 0 is black and 255 is white. Basically, it's a sliding scale saying, okay, what color is a pixel? The way that the activity analysis works, it is saying how much on that scaling does a pixel have to change before you call it changed. So if I lower this, we see a lot of noise here in the background. Basically, I've told the software on that 0 to 255 scale, a pixel only has to change by 1 before you call it changed. That's way too sensitive. What I recommend for fear conditioning, and a lot of people ask me, do I need to put an animal in to get my activity settings to work correctly? My answer is really no, you don't have to. It may be hard to see here, but if you look on the edge here, you see some random purple pixels. I'm in the mindset, you want a little bit of background noise. Animal just got a shock. We saw the animal move around the cage like crazy. I'm in the mindset that even without an animal in here, I see some purple pixel changes occurring, a little bit of background noise. The reason for that in my mindset is you want a little bit of background noise because if your animal completely freezes, if you have it set to no background noise, your threshold will be 0. So tell me when the animal freezes when it's 0% pixels or less. That's basically you bottomed yourself out. If you have a little bit of background noise, even if the animal freezes completely, even if they're dead and they're not moving at all, there's at least some % pixel changes. So we're kind of moving our floor up a little bit. So you have a little bit of noise back there to kind of make, again, things work a little bit easier for you, particularly in the analysis profile for pulling out those events of interest when the animal's freezing. So once again, I'll be in the mindset to have some background noise in here just to ensure that you have, that your floor is basically brought up a little bit so that you have the capability of when you set your settings, you have a little more playroom. So again, I don't think you really have to have an animal in here. And also, if you have gray animals, if you have black animals, do I need different detection settings? No, not really. You could put an animal in here, a gray animal that moves will cause pixel changes just the same as a black animal. Of course, a white animal would not work because it'd be a white animal with a white background, but you get the idea. This is what's really important. This is not so much important. So the secondary tracking feature that I mentioned, experiment settings, is more important than tracking the animal themselves. So now that we've done the arena settings, so the experiment settings, activity analysis, hardware control, the arena settings, specifying my arena, zones aren't really important, and also controlling your hardware, setting your track control settings to have it track your animal, but also present the hardware when you wish, and detection settings and making sure that they're set in such a way that we get some pixel changes, even when the animal's not moving. You can collect some data and then we can actually go on to the analyses. And I'm actually going to switch experiments really quick to actually one where this is the same thing, but where we actually collected some data. Primarily, we're going to focus on the data profile. A lot of you are, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the data profile, and the default data profile looks like this. Here's your data. You get your data out. So all your data is in here, and this is how you get it out. You can use different filters here. So if you have, a variable in your trial list, you can add that. So on compare treatment, like control versus drug treated animals. These filters here are what I call horizontal filters. They're giving you data for the entire trial. But what a lot of people don't use and are really, really useful, and this is not just for fear conditioning, are nesting. These are vertical time filters. They can pull out pieces of time within your trial if you want to compare, for example, in this example, acclimation versus first tone presentation compared to second, compared to third, compared to the post-conditioning timeout. And that's what you can have multiple data profiles. And here's the one that I've made here. So we have the same start box, but what I've done here is we have 5 of these free interval nesting options. Again, this is a vertical timepiece. The first one, for example, you can mix and match basically the start and stop criterion. So it depends, like, I can say I want to start with a certain time and I want to end when a certain trial control event occurs. In this example, I want to pull up from the beginning of the trial, which is track start, until the acclimation condition, which was at 2 minutes before any of the tone and shock were presented. I say when it becomes inactive, basically when it's over. So using this free interval, I can pull out the first 2 minutes of my trial. Using this last one here, one second, gotta move things around. Using this last one here, I can kind of do the reverse. I want to say the post-conditioning trial condition becomes active until the track stops. This is pulling out the last 2 minutes of the trial. So the first 2 minutes of the trial, the acclimation, the last 2 minutes post-conditioning. But I can also add 3 more, which would be from when the tone turns on until when the shock comes on. So essentially, I'm pulling out the 28 seconds. Remember, the tone was on and then the shock came on for 2 seconds and then turns off. So while the tone's on for 30 seconds total, I don't want to include the time that the animal's getting shocked because, of course, the animal's going to be moving around the cage like crazy, and we want to look for immobility during the tone presentation. So this particular free interval nesting option, I've done from tone on, when it comes on, until the shock comes on. So that would be that 28 seconds. And you can indicate which presentation would you like. So I can calculate the results for the first presentation. And another thing that's nice with the newer versions, you can copy and paste these boxes. So I can copy paste it, and then I can simply change the interval here. So interval 2, let me delete this. This one would be interval 2. This one would be interval 3. It's the same thing, tone on until shock comes on. I'm just indicated which one do I want. So what I've done here is I want to pull out the first 2 minutes compared to this first presentation of the tone, compared to the second, compared to the third, compared to the last 2 minutes of the trial. And each one of these goes into its own results container. You can give it a name. So preconditioning, first tone presentation, second tone, third tone, post-conditioning timeout. And that will allow me in my analyses here, my statistics, it will allow me to see the data the way that I want for those 2 different, again, 5 different segments of time during my trial. So after you've set up your data profile to pull out the timepieces that you wish, the analysis profile, again, a lot of this probably looks familiar to a lot of you. Considering that the tracking, the center point tracking is not important here. Movement, location, path, and direction, all of these are not important for fear conditioning. I don't really care about distance, move, velocity. I don't care if my animal's moving or not moving. We didn't do zones. I don't care about that, et cetera, et cetera. All I care about is activity here. So I've added activity and activity state. Activity is continuous numerical data. So it's giving you basically from video X2 compared to X1, how many pixels change? Frame X2 compared to X1, how many pixels change? X3 compared to X2, X4 compared to X3, et cetera. So this is giving you continuous numerical data. And I like to include this so that when I look at my integrated visualization of the video with the data, I can see how many pixels change in percentage from one frame to the next. You can also, I want to set activity state. And activity state is basically an on-off thing. And you can use this to say, for example, you can do anywhere from 2 to 4 states. And I can tell the software, for example, if I do 2 states, I say I only want to get inactive. Basically, I don't care if the animal's highly active. All I care about is when they're inactive. And you can set your threshold for what you want to do. So I believe it's set to 0.1, and I'll show you can change this as you wish. You can even So once you set this threshold, and we'll talk about the integrated visualization. So people ask, what threshold should I use? Like, it depends on many, many different factors. It depends on the size of your arena. It depends on the size of the animal compared to the arena. It depends on the sensitivity that you did in the detection settings for activity. It depends on the resolution of the camera. It depends on many, many different things. So there is no answer to a threshold. You simply set a threshold. You go to the integrated visualization where you can see the data. It will tell you if it thinks the animal's immobile or not based on your thresholds. And if it doesn't work, you can go back to your analysis profile, change it, and keep going back and forth until you get it to work. Once you get it to work, then it's basically you're done here. You can also use an averaging interval to kind of smooth your data out. The averaging interval here, I have it set to 10. So this video is 30 frames per second. What it will do is it will still calculate activity frame by frame, but what it will do is it will group a block of 10 of samples, get the average for that, and then tell me, is that block of 10 samples above or below 0.1%? And again, it's a good way to smooth your data out. So basically 1/3 of a second. You can also exclude instances shorter than a certain period of time. So for example, I don't care if the animal, it freezes for less than a quarter second. I don't want to consider that, exclude all instances of that. So again, you can use this and this to smooth your data out, and this to remove a little bit of small events of interest that really, that are not of interest. They don't really care about those. You can also, in the analysis here, there's a lot of options, but the one that I think is really, that I find useful is cumulative duration within nesting. Remember, we have 5 nests. 2 are 2 minutes long, 3 are 28 seconds long. So while I could get duration, it's kind of hard to compare time within a 28-second bin versus a 2-minute bin. But if you use the percentage of nesting, it will give you a percent amount of time in that bin that they froze. So again, it's just, if an animal freezes for 2.8 seconds in a 28-second bin, that will be 10% change, but it would be much lower for a 2-minute bin. So this will basically kind of give you, standardize your data a bit to make comparing different time bins of different durations to one another. And also, just for fun, I added, you can add hardware states, and I said, tell me when the tone was on, so output too high, and tell me when the shot came on. So I can see when the tone came on, when the shot came on, so I can visualize that in the integrated visualization. And again, as I mentioned, with your data profile, you can pick certain time bins within here. So for example, this is pulling out, during the trial, this is pulling out my first 2 minutes. Let me zoom out a bit. Here we go. So the first 2 minutes compared to the first tone presentation, that 28-second time bin there, you see it right there, compared to the second tone presentation, compared to the third, and then finally the post-conditioning, which would be the last 2 minutes. And I can see here in my visualization, if I go back to a third tone presentation or any tone presentation, I can see the tone was presented here and it's kind of filtered out. You see the shock was on here. And that just, again, I can see visually when those hardware were presented. And sure enough, we're only getting the first 28 seconds, but not those last 2 seconds. And again, we can see the data here along with continuous numerical data for activity, but also activity state. So I can simply watch the video. It's telling me based on my settings if the animal's freezing or not, and I can see if my settings work. I see my animal's not moving. Now they're moving. It says they are not inactive any longer. Animal stops, moves, stops, moves, stops. And again, I'm happy with these settings. If I'm not, I can always go back to the analysis profile, change my settings within here, go back to the integrated visualization and keep doing that until things work out. And finally, based on the data profile and the analysis profile, activity state, cumulative duration with the nesting, I see the 5 different time periods, and I can see that during the first conditioning, the animal was only freezing 9.5% of the time. But then the first, second, and third tone presentation, we see the animal is freezing. Again, this is an N of 1. Typically what we see is with subsequent tone presentations, the animal freezes more and more. But again, this is N of 1 animal. But what's really interesting, if we look at the last 2 minutes compared to the first 2 minutes, we see that there's a significant increase in the amount of time the animal's freezing. Basically, they have associated the environment with something aversive, the shock. So the animal is freezing more. And then hopefully what we'll see in subsequent training days, that the animal does freeze more and more, not only when they're in the context, but also when the tone is presented, because they associate that with something is about to happen. So kind of give an overview, what did we learn today? Particularly with the setup, activity analysis is really important to quantify immobility. Like I said, it's not so important tracking the animal, but activity analysis is very important. So we always want to use in the setup for certain studies where you need to measure immobility. EthoVision can control hardware from multiple arenas. It can also control the hardware independent from one arena to the other in your trial control settings. Arenas, if you are using multiple arenas, they should be the same size because activity is based on a percent size, a percent change of the arena. You want to ensure they're the same size so that your data can be standardized across arenas. You should prioritize tracking the change in the arena, not tracking the animal, but tracking the change. Again, when the animal moves, they cause changes. So don't worry so much about the center point tracking working well. It's not important for fear conditioning. All that's important is activity. So you want to make sure prioritizing that over tracking the animal itself. And again, my opinion is activity settings should be set in such a way that you get some background noise without an animal in here. Again, if we look here in the edges, you can see some background noise. This just makes things easier for setting that threshold in your analysis profile a little bit easier because you're not bottoming yourself out. Analysis, use the data profile to your advantage. It's the data, again, I see a lot of people, not just fear conditioning, they don't use data profile to its full advantage. And when I show people how you can use it, 10 times out of 10, they're impressed, like, oh, wow, I didn't know you could do that. So use it to your advantage, particularly here when you have different segments of time within a trial, if you compare to one another, use the nesting options within there to be able to get the data out the way that you wish. And as I mentioned, do your settings in the analysis profile, go to your integrated visualization and see if they work. If they don't, go back to analysis profile and change, back to integrated analysis, back and forth until you get it to work. This is not just for fear conditioning, it's for any, lots of other studies, just to make sure things are working the way that you wish. So use those in tandem, back and forth, to make sure things are set up the right way to make things easier for you. So just to kind of something, again, I'm using EthoVision XT16, version 16. If you're not sure which version you have, you can go to the help menu about EthoVision XT. And if you click on that, this window will pop up and it would tell you which version you're using. So again, I'm using the most recent version, a week old, 16.0.1536. You may see a different version available in there. But it's just, this is the most recent version. And we just want to show you, we've comparing versions to one another. Version 16, we see there were a couple of new things from 15 to 14, but look at 16. We've added a lot of new functionality. Particularly one that's really important, we've added a deep learning body points detection. The previous versions, it was using the contour of the animal to determine where the nose is, where the tail was, et cetera. So it does use contour, and EthoVision 16 does have improved contour, but it also has a new feature, deep learning, that will make multiple body point detection and tracking much more accurate to make things a lot easier for you, so you don't have to spend so much time on your detection settings or trying to clean up the data in Track Editor. This is really, really useful. For those that are coders, it also includes the capability in analysis profile to use JavaScript code to make your own dependent variables. So again, if it's not included in the list of available dependent measures, you can always make your own using JavaScript code. So if you're using an older version, you may be wondering, am I eligible for a newer one? If you go to Noldus.com, and again, you click on My Noldus. If you go there, if you click on My Noldus, it will take you to this page where if you have a username and password, you can log in. If you don't, you could always create a new account. Again, this is open to anybody that is a Noldus customer. If you create a new account, it will take you here where you can enter your username, your email address, your password, and then it will also ask you for a registration code. The registration code, you can click on this if you don't have it. If you click on that, request a registration code, it will send us an email, we'll get the code, we'll send it to you, and then you use this registration code to create your account, and then you're done. All you have to do from there is just log in using your username and password. In My Noldus, it will tell you there is a license button. If you click on that, it will open a window to tell you which licenses you have available that are associated with your account. For example, this user has two licenses of EthoVision and one of Visa, which is a multi-room reporting system. This will tell you which version of the software you're eligible to use. And to help you decipher the code here, if you look for EthoVision, you see EV140. EV means EthoVision, and 140 means you're eligible to use version 14.0. So if you're using version 11.5 and you go to My Noldus, click on licenses, and you see this, you're like, oh, I'm actually eligible to use EthoVision 14. You can download the software in the downloads here. You can download the software, but also you can download additional documentation. And within the documentation, we have a lot of useful stuff within here, including quick start guides in 5 different languages, an application manual for different applications. I believe it includes a section on fear conditioning. We also have an additional documentation available. If you don't see it here, when you install the software, it will include all this documentation and more. But if there's something that you don't have or you're interested, you can just email support@noldus.com, for example, a PDF of the reference manual, and we can send it to you. The last thing I want to talk about is using EthoVision remotely. As I mentioned, with laboratory restrictions, some people are like, hey, the license key is in our office, is in the lab, we can get in it. Can I use EthoVision XD remotely? Yes. There are a couple of options. You can use it from home with or without the hardware key if you don't have it. When you don't have this license key, you can still do analysis on the data. You can't acquire new data, but you're home, you can't run new animals anyway. So you can install the software on your own computer, and without the license key, you have the capability of using it. If you have a license key, you can always run videos that you already have. There's also the capability, if the computer that has the software installed on it and has a license key plugged in is connected to the network, we could help you connect to it and use it remotely. So again, this will allow you to be able to, again, run videos that you've previously collected and also analyze the data. So you have the option of using it from home with or without a license key, or if the computer in the lab is on the internet, we can help you connect it remotely so that you can continue using the software from that location. So right on time. So how do we do? So just want you, any questions? I believe there is a survey after this webinar. So if you have any questions, you can email me at matt.feltenstein@noldus.com. You can also contact our sales team, sales@noldus.com, or support@noldus.com. This again for the North American office. If anyone wants to talk to support elsewhere outside of North America, you want to email support@noldus.nl. That's Netherlands, where the main office is, main headquarters. Of course, as I mentioned, you can also visit noldus.com/EthoVisionXT if you have any questions. And we appreciate everyone coming today. We appreciate your attention. Hopefully everyone learned a thing or two. By the way, this is a photo of Jason and I, 2006, many, many years ago. This is actually in the Netherlands before we joined Noldus, when we were postdocing, before we even knew what happened. And here we are many, many years later, still doing the same thing. I have slightly less hair in that photo than I did before. But again, thank you, everyone. Right. But again, I appreciate everyone's attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, so where did it go? Yes, so I'm gonna in the chat, everyone. So because we are at 11 o'clock, if you please check the chat, there is a link to what is called a spatial chat. This is something new that we're trying to do some networking and answer some questions. There are 2 questions that came in, actually probably a few at this point, Matt, but the first one was asking about should the test be run in the dark or during the dark cycle of the mouse?
That is a researcher preference question. I cannot give you any recommendation. Obviously, rodents are more active during their nocturnal cycle. So if you want the animal to be more active, so if you're interested in freezing behavior, if the animal's super sleepy, obviously they're probably hanging out, not doing much during the trial. So again, this is a researcher question. This is a researcher preferences question. I would say I'm of the opinion that yes, you want to run the animals during the dark cycle because they will be more active. So you have some more playroom with levels of activity. That's me.
And also one, I'm gonna launch a poll while we're doing all of this, but another question that came in really is summarize that basically because you have a immobility set at 0.1%, so the results you feel or you show have very small level of activity changes, how confident you feel in that threshold, and then also can you compare your detection type to that of Metassociates freeze frame, and I would assume others as well.
Yeah, so again, 0.1, don't worry about the number, what number you use. Again, it depends, as I mentioned, on many, many, many different things. So again, when people ask us, what threshold should I use? The default when you add activity state is 2% or less. But again, it depends on so many different things. The resolution of the camera, the size of the arena, the size of the animal compared to the arena, the sensitivity you did in the activity settings. So there's no answer I can give you for which one you should use. It's just, you have to set a threshold, go to the integrated visualization, look at it. You know, you can see the data with the video. I see my animals freezing. Is it calling them freezing? If you think they're freezing and they're not freezing, then your threshold's wrong. You need to go to the integrated the activity, analysis profile and change it and keep going back and forth until you get it to work. Again, Jason, I think maybe you can comment on Metassociates. I'm not too familiar. It's also similar, right? Is it a pixel kind of thing?
Yeah, and it also does a side view.
A side view, yeah. So
top view. So
that's a good thing that and I'm not just saying this because I work for Noldus and we have the overhead camera. I am of the opinion, this is just me, that the side view camera is not as effective because a rodent moves in 2 dimensions, front and back, left and right. With a top view camera, you're getting all that at all times. You can always see the animal move. A side view camera, if my animal's moving to and from the camera, if they're in the back, if they're like the back of the chamber away from the camera and they freeze, that's very different than when they're on, or let's say not freeze, but do an X amount of activity. If they are closer to the camera, the animal's going to be bigger. That same level of activity will actually cause a higher percent change of pixels. So using a side view camera, you're losing a dimension, you're skewing your data, like it's going to be different for freezing versus the back versus the front, but with the top view camera, you don't have that problem. So again, I'm in the mindset that I think the top view camera, I'm not picking on Metassociates in particular, but just a top view camera in general is just better for tracking that because again, they can only move in 2 dimensions, and with the side view camera, you're kind of losing one of those dimensions.
I'd like to add to that too, Matt, that using the manual scoring within EthoVision, you can go back and manually set what you think would be using and then make your adjustments. And if you run a pilot test with some control animals, then you can operationally then define what you consider to be freezing based on a threshold criteria that Matt just described.
Yeah. That's actually very
freezing, not freezing.
Right. That's a very good point. So I'll just kind of give everyone an example. A friend of mine, he was asking about EthoVision for doing 4 swim tests, again, immobility. He had 20 videos and he hand scored all of them. I said, send me your 20 videos. Tell me how you hand scored 2 of them. I will change the settings until I get it to match what you say. I will run EthoVision for the other 18 videos, and then you tell me if they match. I sent him the data. He's like, wow, they're all within like 1 or 2 seconds of my hand scoring. Done. So yeah, that's a good point, Jason. Yeah, do like hand score like 1 or 2 videos. You know, it will show you in the integrated visualization where you hand score it. You set the settings in such a way that they get really close to matching, and then you should be done. That's it.
Well, so we are at 11:05. So there are a few more questions that didn't get answered, and I'm sorry about that, but I would like to encourage you all to check the chat, to the spatial chat, and we can continue these discussions. If your time is up and you can't join us in the spatial chat, I'd like to thank you for joining us in the webinar. I am going to stop the recording.